Hello, everyone. Welcome to NB Geeks Let's Talk. We are going to talk today about one of my favorite, absolutely all-time favorites in film history is the Universal Golden Age of monster movies. I believe we're going to talk about why they're good, why they matter, and why they still stand the test of time. With that being said, let me introduce my awesome co-host here, the man who makes Twitter trolls cry and mops the floors with their tears, Jack Beers!
Hello. Wait. Turn on the fog for effect.
And his special guest, Bones.
It's like he's growing out of my shoulder.
It's like I said, Alyssa, we've got to come up with something for you to do. Or not for you to do. Sorry, that was poor choice of words. Something, a way I can introduce you. I'm gonna have to get to know you a lot better, so I can, give you that kind of introduction as well, because I really want to. So, as we said, folks, we're going through, which I have no idea how long it's going to take, and I don't care because I'm having a fucking blast. History of film. And this is one of my favorite eras. Universal monster movies. Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, Wereman. Was it Werewolf or Wereman? Sorry. Werewolf. Okay. Creature from the Black Lagoon, my personal favorite for a lot of reasons. And the reason why I titled this part one of question, because there's no fucking way we're getting through all of this in one session. But I know you two, you're film experts. You have the notes. You've done the research. I was supposed to be at a concert this weekend, but COVID fucked me twice now in 2 years. Once because they canceled my concert because of COVID. Once because I couldn't go to a concert because of COVID. So, you know what? Let's at least have some fucking fun and talk about one of the greatest eras in horror movies. So, Jack, Alyssa, where do you guys want to go with this? Where do you want to start? What topic area? Where do you want to go with this? Start out.
Well, I did notice that a lot of the earlier films were actually based off books that were written in the 1800s.
Correct.
So, like you have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which came out in 1816. You have
which I have read. Have you guys read it?
Yes.
Yeah, and there's also a series of Edgar Allan Poe stories that were also turned into Universal monster movies. You got Murders in the Rome. I've never seen it, but it's Murders in the Rome Morgue is one of them.
Mhm.
That was written in 1841. The Black Cat was written by Poe in 1843, and The Raven was written by Poe in 1845.
Correct.
And then you also had in 1897, two other books were written. It was The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, and of course Bram Stoker.
One of my favorite classical sci-fi writers.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love War of the Worlds, the book. I didn't like the Tom Cruise one till I realized, oh shit, this is actually more in line with the book. Man, we're getting a feedback somewhere from me. Let me see. Maybe it's me. Okay, I've dropped everything. I'm sorry, guys. We're getting feedback. Does anybody know where it's coming from?
No.
Because it's only me, so I'm trying to figure that out. Anyway, maybe okay. It sounds like it's going off. Okay. War of the Worlds was, one of my favorite books, Time Machine and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting how this was really an era, in my opinion, where they were trying to take IPs from written literature and figure out how to make it for film audience.
Mm-hmm. You're right about that. And the other book that was released in 1897, the same year, was Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Correct.
Now, the idea of vampires or vampirism or what was around since ancient times, right? But
I actually used to have Jack. I used to have an encyclopedia. Sorry to interrupt you. I don't mean that, but I used to have an encyclopedia back in the 90s. Thank you, PCAT, for coming in. Love having you here as always. He says he loves Black Cat and Raven with Bella Lugosi and Boris Karloff.
Yeah, they were both in.
I'm gonna have to watch that.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. They were both.
It was it was the Black Cat. It was the first movie that they were both in together.
Correct. That was I think the only film they were in, from what I've read up on.
No, they've been in other ones afterwards.
But
Not too many.
So they had to figure out how to take this from a book format, which I read Dracula, and Dracula is done in more. I don't know the writing style, but it was basically the whole book is almost all just journal entries throughout the book. So they had to figure out how to take a journal entry book and turn it into a movie. Right. And they had to discuss, like his red eyes and stuff. And of course it was black and white, but the atmosphere, the layout, the lack of, maybe care of his castle for one thing. It was very dilapidated and not in good function. And right. I think those were symbolisms of one of the things. What I was saying was I used to have an encyclopedia back in the 90s that was the history of vampires worldwide. And it was so many different, every culture, almost every culture has a form of vampirism in their history, in their culture.
Right. And so that's why I say the idea of vampirism was around for a very long time, since ancient times. But the Dracula was created in 1897 by Bram Stoker. And and the first time someone tried to put it into film was not a Universal one. It was called Prana Films, and they're the people who released Nosferatu in 1922.
Which, by the way, if you've never seen that, the excellent silent film. I think we talked about that last week when I brought it up, because I think we talked about Nosferatu and the makeup and just for the time to be able to make somebody look like that was just fucking fantastic.
Yeah, you're right. And the problem with it, it was based off of Bram Stoker's Dracula, and by the 1920s, they had, the copyright laws had gotten pretty strict. So what happened was they ended up filming this without permission from the Stoker estate. By then, Bram had died, but his wife was still alive, and so his wife sued them for copyright infringement and won. And so as a result, the court ordered all of the copies of this movie to be burned. Of course, some of them survived, which is why we can enjoy them today. But they lost all their copyright claims to it. They lost whatever money they were going to make off of it. Was gone. So that was kind of a failure. I never realized that Nosferatu was a failure in that aspect. So when Carl Laemmle Jr., who's the son of Carl Laemmle, who's started Universal, he took over 1928, and he decided that. Oh, by the way, he gave his son Universal Studios as a 21st birthday gift. Can you imagine?
Hey,
Can you imagine your father builds something, and then you grow up, become 21, and he's just like, "Here's the business, son. Good luck."
You're on your own now, kid.
Oh! By the way, we're about a year or two away from the Great Depression. Good luck. But So like, you know, and then of course 1929, Jazz Singer came out, which was the first sound. So by 1929, 2 years after the Jazz Singer, 75% of all films were in sound now, had sounds.
Talkies.
There were
For
talkies.
those of you who don't know, that was when the era of talkies came out, or what they called them back then.
Right, and so Universal, of course, had their own sound system, and they started using it. And the problem was they had to get rid of the thing that they had done for, you know, ever since Universal opened, which was allow people to come in. You know, they charge people to come in and watch the films being made. They had to stop doing that because now they needed complete control of the sound, and you couldn't get these audience members to shut up. So apparently, so they closed the set so that they there's no sound, you know, except for the sound that they want to make or whatever, and from then on, it's been closed sets for the most part.
I didn't know. So you actually had, Alyssa, Jack, you actually had sets where just anybody could kind of come on and walk on and do that kind of stuff, and then they had to say, you know, because we've seen in movies and stuff, you know, it says closed set or there's a red light or something like don't do this. So they used to have people always in there. Once they got to the talkie point, that was, and I don't mean that as an insult, obviously, but they were like, can you guys shut up?
Yeah, it became a problem, apparently.
I think that's when they had to come up with the megaphone to say shut up, basically, too.
Because, you know, like, what they would do is, like, you know, they'd have a scene where, like, the monster comes out or something like that, and then the audience members would boo the monster. Yes. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. You know, that was just what they did.
Yes.
So 1931 is when Dracula came out. It's also the same year that Frankenstein came out, but we'll talk about Frankenstein next. So Dracula, in order to get Dracula done, they knew the lesson they learned from, you know, people who did Nosferatu. They went to the Stoker estate and they paid $40,000. Not just for permission though, but they paid for the rights to the Dracula character. So now they own.
So they bought the IP.
Yeah, they bought the IP, and so you know, so they paid $40,000 for it, and Bela Lugosi actually did Dracula on stage before he did Dracula. And
I did research that. I do remember that he did Dracula on stage.
Yeah, yes. and he lobbied for the role, and he got it because he accepted like a lower salary. Let's see, there was another actor, Edward Van Sloan, who played Van Helsing on stage, and he also played Van Helsing in this film. So it cost, you know, in total, it cost about $341,000 to make, and it took 36 days to film it, and then it made a profit of $700,000.
Which we're talking about the 1930s, so that's a fucking hit.
Oh yeah, that's a hit.
We have to also remember these kind of movies weren't, you know, like we are now, where everything is global entertainment. These were pretty much domestic. I mean, that's where they thought, that's where the market was. I mean, not they thought, but that was where the market was. So when you make a profit that big, especially at that time, yeah. I mean, people think, I sometimes think people think that movie didn't make that much money. I'm like, you have to think of the history. You have to think of the context of the time. You have to think of the distribution. And not only that, we haven't even ever discussed this, and I think we should do this one time. One of these days, we need to do something about how advertising has, you know, advertising a movie. How did they advertise those movies? Well, you didn't have everybody owning a TV. Mm-hmm. So you either saw the trailer or maybe heard about it on the radio.
Right. So I mean, that's basically the background behind Dracula. The the background behind Frankenstein was, as I said, like it was written in 1816, and
Which
it was
I
actually,
read.
and it was actually done in 1910 by Thomas Edison. He was the first one to do a Frankenstein. By then, the copyright laws. By then, it had been enough time had passed to where he could actually like do it without getting
Edison
sued.
could get away with shit. Yeah,
And he probably had the lawyers to fight it anyways.
Probably. You know what, Edison?
So
here's a bunch of light bulbs.
So now that one, like I watched that one recently, just to get a taste of it, and the monster there doesn't look like the traditional Frankenstein you think of nowadays. He actually looked more like a hunchback, like a Notre Dame hunchback, just a little hairier, stuff like that. And like it didn't have like the electricity, like how he was put together and all that. It didn't have any of that. He was formed inside of a room. So
okay,
but
so
for
no
the
lab.
yeah, so there was, I mean, it was sort of a lab, but it's not the same. It's not the same. Yeah. So in 1919, they Universal, in their backlot, they built a courthouse or like a court for the movie The Miracle Man, right? It's called the Court of Miracles, and it's very small. It's got a small fountain in the middle of it, and so that's also where Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein would be filmed as well. When they were finally filmed in 1931, it was just Dracula was released first, and it was a success. So they kind of rushed to make Frankenstein after that. Bela Lugosi was also supposed to play Frankenstein's monster, but like there was some bad makeup tests, and he left. Like he didn't like the way he looked. He left. So they hired Boris Karloff, and who obviously took the role. And what tripped me out.
Excelled at it.
Yes, he did. What tripped me out was that he when they built or when they did the electric scene, the It's Alive scene, and all that. When they I'm sorry, I'm like blacking out. When they filmed that, they actually used a Tesla coil.
Okay.
To
mimic
the lightning. They used the Tesla coil to mimic the lightning. So it was actual like sparks coming out and everything, right? It wasn't a special, like it wasn't like an effect or whatever. It was practical. And Boris was like, I am not laying there with all those sparks. So the guy who designed it, the guy who designed like that entire lab, his name was Kenneth Strickfin, something like that. He went, and so he ended up doubling as the monster for that scene because it was Karloff was afraid of getting electrocuted, basically. It cost $262,000 to make that, and it went on to make in 6 months it made $1.4 million, and by 1953 it had made a total of $12 million.
Wow!
And that's one of the things we have to remember too, is there was a time, because this was before Betamax, this was before VHS, this was long before DVD and Blu-ray. The only way you were going to see a movie again was when it was re-released. So
Yes.
They would re-release movies, be like, oh shit, I missed this the first time. Now I can go see it again.
Right. Yeah. So that's what happened. Like now, this is when the Depression was just starting too, and they got a couple of hits in 1 year. So then they were like, oh, let's make another Frankenstein movie. Let's make a Mummy movie. Let's make a Invisible Man. Let's make some Poe movies. You know what I mean? Like that's when they were starting to think about that stuff right after that. And so Bride of Frankenstein went through about 4 years of development hell, about 3-4 years of development hell, because they couldn't figure out what to do with it. like how did they wrote like 3 or 4 scripts. Those scripts were rejected. Then they got a script they kind of liked, and then they wrestled with changing it and everything. So when they were finally done doing it, then they started filming the scenes and stuff.
I can't answer that question. Maybe you two can.
First Talking Era sequel. Probably.
It's probably close. If it's not, it's one of the top ones. One of the early.
Would it be maybe? Well, actually, let me. I'd have to take a look. I'd have to find it. But did Bride of Frankenstein come out before Daughter of Dracula?
I think so.
When did Daughter of Dracula come out? Let me see.
I think
don't
so.
know exactly.
I think,
but
1936. Dracula's Daughter came out in 1936, and Bride of Frankenstein came out in 1935.
Okay, so they're close together.
Yeah, so they're pretty close. So the bride's hair. First of all, they never say this in the film, but the bride's name was Mary Shelley.
Oh,
in honor of the author of the original movie.
Yes.
Or not movie, sorry, the author of the book.
The novel, yes.
And
novel.
And her hairdo was based on the Egyptian queen Nefertiti.
Okay.
If you've seen the sculpture of her, she's wearing this large crown, like
yes.
So they kind of based it off of that, and then they just put the electrical things on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That and it cost $293,000 to film, and it made $2 million in the box office.
Okay, I know her shriek is made from a combination of sounds too.
His daughter, I guess, or something like that. But so they wanted to make something called the Showboat, which not a Universal Monster thing. It was something they wanted to make. But they didn't have the money. They still didn't have the money to make, because they were spending a lot of money to make these movies. Even though they were getting a lot of money back, they were still spending a lot of money to make these movies. And so they ended up having to borrow money, and they put their studio up as collateral. And they couldn't pay it off so the borrowers foreclosed and took over the studio. So Carl Laemmle and his son were booted out, replaced by a guy named Charles Rogers. And from there on, like they started making a lot of the Universal Monster sequels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Surely, I mean, like they were starting to do it, but they were really doing it after Son of Dracula came out in 1943, House of Dracula in 1945, Son of Frankenstein in 1939, Ghost of Frankenstein in 1942. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. That's the first crossover, I think.
Yes, that one had. Unfortunately, it had the Dracula. Unfortunately, it wasn't the Dracula I was used to, so that part I didn't like. But I did like the rest of the movie.
Yeah, and then House of Frankenstein, 1944. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, 1940.
Yes.
So they just kept remaking these things. Like they had The Mummy that came out in 1932, but then in 1940 they came out with The Mummy's Hand. 1942, The Mummy's Tomb. 1944, The Mummy's Ghost and The Mummy's Curse. Both in the same year. By the way, the inspiration to make a mummy movie was because 10 years before, in 1922, is when they had opened Tutankhamun's tomb.
Oh,
that was real popular and everything. That was going on.
Oh, okay.
So that, and of course, the Mummy's Curse and everything like that. So they decided to go ahead and do that. Boris Karloff played the Mummy.
Yes,
there was no book that they could find to like base anything off of, so they just wrote their own script. It was one of the few times they started writing their own scripts just out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They filmed for 3 weeks. They only did the makeup for 1 day on Karloff for 1 day, because the makeup was freaking grueling. It took 8 hours to apply the makeup. He started at 7 a.m.
Oh,
and he finished.
man.
He finished at 7 p.m. and then from there he filmed until 2 a.m. And then after that, it still took 2 hours to remove all that makeup, and the gum on his face, it hurt when they took it off. So after they had already done all the close-ups that they needed. So after that, it was just they put it on much more lighter. They filmed from further away.
Is it just me, or maybe were the actors back in a certain time a little less bitchy and a little like, okay, I've got to suffer for this role so I can get paid?
Unless they broke out with a reaction like the one that played the Tin Man in the movie The Wizard of Oz, they wouldn't replace it, and they just had to just sort of endure it. They just had to sort of just sit through and say, okay, it is what it is. I like the job. Sure, give me my money. End of story.
Yeah, no, it was but that was pretty. I mean, like I hear these, like how long it takes, like Worf's makeup and stuff like that.
It's insane. Yeah,
Jack.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he played that role for so long, but yeah, like something like that, I don't even think I would handle that.
No, I mean Lon Chaney's.
I don't have the patience
that with the makeup stuff too.
I don't have the patience.
I'll address that when it's my turn. But yes.
But I'm almost done. I'm almost done here. So, but let's see. Where were we at? I talked about the Invisible Man already.
Briefly.
No, you have not gotten to the Invisible Man.
Okay, so yeah, so so in 1931, like as soon as like Dracula was popular, they bought the rights to the Invisible Man for $10,000, and they also purchased the rights to a book called The Murder Invisible by Philip Wiley, and it spent and after that it spent like the next 2 years in development hell. They couldn't find a story for it. They kept figuring out how to do it. They figured it out, and it was released in 1933. Karloff was playing Dr. Jaff Griffin, who was the Invisible Man, and he left the project. He during the development hell, he left the project, so he didn't play that. So Claude Rains ended up playing him, and that's who you see in the movie. They would. So in order to do like I've always loved the scenes where like he pulls the wrapping off.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Yeah, or the scene where he's chasing the people in just a shirt and nothing else. Like I always wondered how they do that, like in a practical sense. Like, if you look up how to do that effect, everyone's going to be like, oh, well, simple. You go on Adobe Photo, or you go on Adobe Premiere, you put on a green screen, and all this stuff, right? No, that's not how they did it.
Not how they did it back then. There was no Adobe.
Yeah. So how they did it was they had a black velvet suit for this guy, right? He put it on, and he would put his clothes on over that. Right?
Oh, make it look like he blended in.
Right. And they would film the scene first without him, right? With just the set and whoever else is in it, but without him. Okay. Then they would cover the set in black velvet, and then they would have him do his role, and they would composite that. And of course, like during the composite phase, they would get rid of the black, and it would look transparent.
Oh.
So yeah, but it was really early composite. Is how they did it. It's a very good effect. It was like even today it stands out.
I remember watching The Invisible Man, and then after this, I want to hear from Alyssa because I know she's got some things to say. But I mean, I remember when he took off he was taking the wrapping off, and I'm like, even as a kid, I was like,
first he takes off his nose. He takes he had a little nose or whatever. First he takes that off, and then you see nothing. There's like see through in there. It's really well done.
Yes.
Yes, I would have to agree. Alyssa, please, as your
We forgot one monster, the Phantom of the Opera. His book actually goes back to 1911. I was going to mention that was one we forgot too. But here's one thing. So here's the thing that's kind of cool. I was curious, like saying, okay, well, when did zombie movies get started exactly? They actually got started in 1932 with a movie called White Zombie. That's actually considered the first feature-length zombie film. And so that's kind of crazy when you think about it. And there was also a Walking Dead movie in 1936 that was made. So The Walking Dead does not go back to the current time. It actually goes back to 1930s. Let me double check to be sure.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes, 1936, because Boris Karloff was in that film, actually, of all people. And some of his Frankenstein information that Jack may have left out that he didn't include, but believe it or not, he and his costume, his shoes themselves were 11 pounds. And he's 5'11". So when he puts on these shoes, it makes him look much, much taller than he really was. So he has these 4-inch platform shoes that are 11 pounds. So that's the reason why you see him just going straight, because I'm sure he probably couldn't wobble too much because he has to walk just a certain way. He even did an early adaptation of The Raven. And like I said, he did the Walking Dead one. Bela Lugosi one, he was also in many silent films similar to Boris Karloff. But Karloff, he didn't do too much silent films because he was more considered the brawnier kind of guy. So they would put him in a lot of manual labor kind of jobs, saying, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And he'd say, okay, fine, whatever. And then that's when eventually he got his big break where he got to do the Frankenstein, and he became iconic for that. I know he later did many, many years later where he does the voice of the Grinch in the How the Grinch Stole Christmas. That's where we hear his voice. So he started going into that.
I must stop Christmas from coming.
Yes. You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch.
You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch.
But yes, I mean, Bela Lugosi, when you mentioned this too, Jack, when you were saying that he had done the roles before, and the thing is, he had done 261 performances as Dracula. I mean, he had done Broadway adaptations, he had done the film adaptations, so he had an extensive career. And even when he died, he was buried in one of his Dracula costumes. He didn't personally request it, but his family felt like, you know what, this is the way he's known for, so let's bury him in the cape.
They put his Dracula cape on him. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
Yes, exactly. Now, Lon Chaney, one of the makeup things, when Jack was mentioning about the makeup, Lon Chaney is considered to be one of the icons of makeup in the early days, because he basically made people think, well, monsters aren't technically monsters. Monsters are the ones that are considered the deformed, the ones that came back from the war where they were missing an eye, missing an arm, missing a leg. And so he was one of the early pioneers for the makeup and all that kind of stuff. So he did that himself. And he basically there's so many of his films that are unfortunately that are lost. There's like little bits and pieces of it. He did 157 films, but there's 102 of them that are missing. They're incomplete. We don't have all of them.
Wow.
So that's just crazy that he did so much. I mean, he does the Phantom of the Opera, he does the early version of the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and like I said, he does that makeup himself. No one else created that makeup. Lon Chaney himself personally created that makeup himself. So yeah, I mean, that's nuts when you think about it. But yeah, I mean, he was also a screenwriter too. Lon Chaney was a screenwriter. He was also a director. He was also this actor too. I mean, this guy practically did it all. He was a one-person show. But the crazy thing about these early films, we kind of consider them cheesy. But here's the thing. They actually got the ratings, and that's how sort of the rating system got started. In 1933, the British, the name of it was called the British Board of Films Censors, or the BFC, introduces the rating of H, or horrific films likely to be frightened or horrified children under the age of 16. And a year later, Hollywood introduced their own version. So when they see these early films, they say, oh, this is going to be too freaky. And this is even before we have all the 50s, 60s, and modern blood, guts, and gore kind of stuff. And yet here it is that they're putting this 1933's version saying, No, we find this horrific. This is going to frighten little kids. So let's put this rating up there called H rating. But yeah.
H rating, really?
Yeah, it was called an H rating, and they called it horrific because they said, oh, this is going to frighten children. This is going to give them nightmares. This is going to scare them. So, like I said, the British started it in 1933. A year later, America picks that up and says, oh, let's come up with that too. So here's the thing. They considered it horrific. But yeah.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, what else did I write? So, I mean, yeah, I wrote down some of the notes about how the makeup was made. A lot of it was done with just basically where they did a composite in and baking the mask after they would composite it after they made it from the actor's particular face. So they would just basically take that mask, mold it, shape it, and everything like that to fit that particular actor's face. And then they would basically put it into like an oven, and then they would bake it. And then by the time the actor puts it on, it basically conforms to that particular actor. They do it a lot similar today, very, very similar. It's just not as extensive as the way Lon Chaney would do his Phantom or his Quasimodo and stuff. Because, like I said, Lon Chaney was a master at what he did, even though a lot of people.
If you look at some of the makeup and some of the makeup of the characters, you realize that at least in the way I see them, they're not half-assing this. They're really putting their effort into making this character look like this.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But what do you guys think about? Oh, I'm sorry, Alyssa. Go ahead and continue with what you're saying.
Another thing that they did too, they started branching away from the monster ones, from the werewolf and all that kind of stuff, just before the war era. So they started branching away from all those traditional monster kind of things. So they started branching out and said, well, we need some new material. So they started branching out to the mythology and the other foreign countries one. And so that's why a lot of times when you see monster movies later on down the road, they're not the werewolf, they're not the vampire, they're not the mummy kind of stuff. They started looking into other countries, other cultures, and say, okay, what can we find? Like maybe the Chupacabra kind of stuff. Let's create a monster movie about that. So that's why I started shifting from all those mummy kind of stuff to the other kind of stuff. They start preying on people's fear, saying, well, the monster could be right next to you and you don't even know it's there. I mean, it's crazy.
What I find interesting is, you talk about the success of these movies. There was a time, they used to say, like in sci-fi, they sometimes in filmography, and as I'm more going through and learning with you guys, especially now, is they did not do this as, oh, I'm just making a movie, whatever, it's going to be whatever, monster movie, big deal, I'm going to move into it. They gave a shit about the product they were trying to put out there. One of the things I love about, and I've only recently started remembering this because I've been watching some older stuff, is the scores and the tension that goes with the music of the scene. I think in a lot of those scenes we have, I'll be example, and I'm jumping ahead here, but I'm just saying this one. The Shining wasn't scary to me because of the imagery. The Shining was scary to me because of the sound, because of the score. That's what scared the shit out of me. And we've gotten away from that to a point where it was meant to build tension. It was meant to have a purpose. Now, when you look at a modern horror movie, it's like they do that. Dun, 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 dun. Nothing. Okay, where's the fucking jump scare that nobody gives a fucking shit about? But what they did back then for like scenes where, especially in Dracula, was you'd have the look on his face and he's not saying anything, and there's the look and the music, and it just adds to the tension like all hell. And I noticed that similar in Frankenstein and stuff. is as I'm going through, like for example, I just finished watching Night Gallery, the first episode of Rod Serling's, because somebody mentioned it to me. And I'm like, as he's looking at this picture and this picture keeps changing, the music goes more intense. And I'm like, this is just freaking awesome. And it's amazing how the scores are so integral to movies at that time, and they really, I think, understood that, because they didn't try to fuck you over. They didn't try to fake you out. They wanted you to know that shit's about to go somewhere.
Oh yeah, but they also did that in the theaters too, though. That was another thing that I learned too about later on when we move a little bit forward to like the 50s and 60s. They actually had these particular things with the theater, what they call these perceptor illustrator kind of things. And basically it was the 3D effects before it was the 3D effect, where it would literally shake the person in the theater who's sitting there. They would do something like that. They had a particular person that was in the theater that would work there and create these 3D effects kind of thing, where your chair's shaking, where there's electric shocks coming toward you, where the film is coming at you kind of thing. That was the thing that they started doing. And unfortunately, they stopped doing away with that soon after the 60s and everything like that.
I actually went when I was at, I think it was Universal, where they had the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids experience. Yes. And they had the scene where I think it was rats were going by, and all of a sudden you get these freaking air jets just bumping out, and you're like, I went like this. I'm like, what the fuck? I literally, what the fuck? I'm with my kids and everything, and they have sound effects, and they have this atmosphere where I'm like, holy shit! For a second, I really thought there were freaking rats going across my feet.
But these people actually had the actual rat, though. That was the thing for this time, though, in the 50s with the projector. They actually would have an actual rat come at you. That was the thing. They had somebody actually out there in the theater who would have a cage full of, say, rats and release it onto the audience members. And they're actually reacting to a real rat, even though the screen. So, yes.
Reminds me of it reminds me of Captain EO in Disneyland when they used to have that. Because it was Captain EO is a Michael Jackson film basically, and it's in 3D. But not only that, but whenever there's like fog on the screen, they actually shoot fog out. They do whenever there's like a firefight, they fight with lasers. They're shooting lasers, like they actually have lasers that come out. Like it's really interesting. It was a really interesting experience. But anyways, we're going way ahead of ourselves.
I know.
Yeah, we're getting way ahead of ourselves. But you know what? That's okay, because this is history of film. And sometimes we need to jump ahead and kind of be like, okay, we're going to compare things, because, we one of the reasons why I want to do something like this is because of the fact that we have to go back to this era. That we talked about the silent films, we talked about the history before and what started this. And, one of the things I loved about Dracula more than Frankenstein, and I'm only going to say this, and it is because in Frankenstein, it had, in my opinion, almost a lighter tone. Whereas in Dracula, you had the very dark castle. And yes, I know in Frankenstein they had the dark castle, but you had the dark castle. You saw more of that castle in Dracula than you saw in Frankenstein. You really only saw a lab and a few other small parts of it. But you didn't, when you were watching Dracula, when the one character, was it Jack? Not you. The one who eats the flies.
Igor?
Mm-hmm.
No, not Igor. I don't think it was Igor. But I mean, the atmosphere, the lighting, and I mean, this is something, as I've started watching older films and stuff, I'm very impressed because of the technology it had, the lighting, the coloring, not coloring, sorry, the lighting, the shading they had to do, the way they had to figure out the light stuff, and then the atmosphere they were able to make around it is like you knew when you saw this fog and stuff going, it did an eerie moment for me in the movie where it's like, oh, this guy really should turn the fuck around.
Yes.
This guy should really turn the fuck around. But some of the things too is so when they did him as a bat, because I remember, if I'm incorrect, correct me on this. I remember they talked about two animals Dracula could turn into, a wolf or a bat. Now I know we saw the bat, but I don't think we ever saw the wolf.
I don't think we saw the wolf.
I think we saw the bat. The wolf one was a different one, I think, altogether. I think that involved the werewolf.
I'll have to double check that, but yeah, I mean, he had that ability, and then it was, even the bat. They make the mention of the bat with the red eyes, and even though the movie's in black and white, you can watch the movie and actually subconsciously see those red eyes, and because he had just the way he could do his face, just looking and staring, was absolutely freaking amazing. It was like you could read so much from those nonverbals.
Yes. Exactly. I mean, it's still going back to the silent film era kind of thing, because they're still trying to do it non-verbally, like you said, because the thing is, these people are probably thinking, well, how do we make these red eyes pop out without making them red? Because obviously they have the ability to do so, but those red eyes are a little bit darker than the rest of what he's wearing. You can tell it doesn't blend in with the black. It's a different shade altogether. It's a different composite altogether.
That bat still exists too, that prop bat. I just sent you
really.
I just sent you a Reddit link, but it's a picture
on Facebook or Twitter.
On Twitter.
Okay.
I'll check it after. I'll check it after we get done.
But yeah, like it's just a picture of it. It still exists.
Oh, I see. I see which one it is.
Yeah.
Oh, really? And I mean, they were really good at the simplistic with their props. And I mean, it was like, he's just, you're like, why is he just flying there? Why is he just staring there? And if you think about it, he's not a bat. He's an immortal vampire. He's not going to act like this is one of those things that annoys me in some of these fucking movies where the vampires change their form, then they start acting like the animal. It's like, no, this is the person shape-shifting into this. They're still going to have everything they normally have. And he had this, first off, my favorite line from it, I don't drink wine. It just, the way he does that, the way, I don't know if that was improv, how he delivered that line. I don't know how many times. It's like, he could have just said, I don't drink wine. But no, the way he said, I don't drink wine. It's like he's trying to actually think about what he needs to say next. And it was, to me, it was just beautiful acting by everybody in the cast. And the lighting, the effects, the insanity that was brought into it by one of the characters, because he's like, yeah, I want rats. Yeah, he's going to give me lots of rats. And then when we bring in Van Helsing is not hunting him. Van Helsing is just investigating something that he's been asked to. He wasn't actively looking for Dracula. He wasn't actively looking for this. It just, it happened to be the case, and he had enough goddamn sense to figure out what the hell was going on. That was the intelligence of his character. And sometimes they, he went in, he did his thing, realized what was going on, told people, and surprisingly, some people didn't believe him. I mean, why would you? He's like, look, I'm just telling you what I got here. I'm not, he doesn't come off like they do in movies nowadays. There's a fucking vampire out there at the house.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, I think this is a vampire. Why do you think it's a vampire? And he gives explanation and explicitive that, where nowadays we're bitching about, shut the fuck up with some of your explicit because they're annoying and they're pointless to the story, to this was actually important to the story, to why he's explaining to them, hey, I think we have a vampire. This is why. And they're like, oh, fuck.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, the original vampire hunters, they weren't like hunting vampires in castles or anything like you see in like, modern day, in your Count Duckula and stuff like that. I
haven't thought about that movie. I haven't thought about that show in a long time.
Oh yes.
They actually what they used to be,
or as he was also called, Ducky Poo.
Something like that, by one like his maid or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah. Bigger than a bread box nanny.
Right, but the original vampire hunters, what they did was they would be hired by a family usually, because like normally what would happen was a loved one would die in the family, and then people started getting sick, and they would find a way to convince themselves that the first person who died or whatever is coming out back to kill us or whatever.
Oh yeah.
So they would hire a vampire, and then they would go with them to the grave, and they would exhume the body, and using their vampire hunter's kit, they would mutilate the body in various different types of ways. There's like, they might cut out the heart, they might cut off the head, they might put a stake through, they might put like a bunch of stakes in there.
Burial desecration. Oh my god.
There's one that they found. It was like a cemetery. It was eroding away, like by a cliff or something like that. So they removed a bunch of the bodies, and what they found in one of them was somebody had taken their bones, their rib cages, and just basically like scrambled it. Like just mixed it all up.
Oh wow!
And then they took his femur bones, his two femur bones, and they put them on they put them as an X, and then they took the head and they put it right next to it.
Oh, the skull and cross. I like what PCAT said here too. In the theater of the mind was so effective. You don't see. He's right. You don't see Dracula's fangs. You don't see.
That's
any
very
blood.
True.
That's true.
But you really can believe his fangs are coming out when he's going to bite someone, and you like I was saying earlier, I can see, even though I've watched it in black and white, and I will never watch it in color because I think that would destroy the experience of the movie, because I've been very clear in saying some movies absolutely do not need to be made in color. But I can feel the red eyes. I can see it in my mind. And that's, I think, one of the beauties of what they were able to do. I mean, they didn't do the fangs. They didn't do the red eyes, obviously, because of color. But like you said, Alyssa, they made his eyes a little bit darker.
Yes, where they stood out.
Do you know how they did that? Because I don't think contact lenses were made back then.
It might have been a makeup effect. That's the only thing I could figure. If they did have contacts, it was very limited on what they did. So they could have asked. So I don't know.
Because I think contacts didn't come out till the 60s or 70s. But it'd be interesting to hear how they did the makeup effect. And that's one of the things, we've been talking about is especially is just the beauty of what they were able to do with what they had, and they understood their audience.
Oh yeah.
1887.
Really?
Whoa.
Yes. A German glassblower used Herschel's ideas to come up with the first known glass contact lens back in 1887.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, I wonder when they became. I'll have to look up and find out when they became more commercial, because
right,
they had to shift from that glass to plastic-ish kind of material.
Well, I mean, at this point, they put those. When Frankenstein, they put the makeup on. The bolts and stuff. I guess it's not too far to say, okay, for this scene, I need you to put these in your eyes for a few seconds. It's going to suck, but deal with it. And, it seems like they would do that. That's definitely interesting.
That's true, because I think they did that with Judy Garland and The Wizard of Oz. They tried a couple makeup tests, because I think they tried it with blue eyes and stuff like that. And then they did the makeup test with the blonde wig, and they said, wait, this doesn't fit her. So, yeah, I think that was the case with that, too.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Oh boy, when we get to the Wizard of Oz in that era, oh yeah.
But the crazy monster movies. Let's see, what was his name? Oh yeah, Friedrich March. He actually won an Oscar for playing one of these kind of monster things in 1931 for playing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So
yeah.
I haven't. I don't think I've seen the 1930s Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I'm gonna have to catch, because I've read, a lot of these monster movies we've talked about. I've read all the books on them, and I've read Dracula, I've read Frankenstein, I've read The Strange Case of Jekyll and Hyde, and things like that. And I think that even though they differentiate in a lot of ways, different from the books, there's an aspect that I understand to that. Like I said, with Dracula was pretty much, the book is literally just, people writing information down. And if you look at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, it's also a lot of journal entries too. So they had to figure out how to take that and put it to film and make it understandable to people, so they could understand the aspect of it. But also, we didn't have, I think at the time, and I think we'll end on this because we're about at an hour. I'm sure you guys got a shit ton more research you've done. I need to do a lot more research myself, because we're obviously going to be talking about this again next Sunday, because this is just too good. But we didn't have a physical visual of these characters. We didn't really have a Dracula picture. We didn't have a Frankenstein picture. So the reason why those particular pictures are so iconic is because for most people, even those who read the books, this was the first time they saw it live action, and the experience of seeing, I've seen movies where I'm like, oh my God, this is jumping off the page. Or it's like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that. And they saw these visions like, oh, I can understand that, they had a respect for their audience, especially in my opinion with the Frankensteins, because I know we talked about Dracula a lot. But one of the things about Frankenstein, excuse me, was one of the beauties is, who's the real monster? Is it's obviously not the monster. Is it Frankenstein, or is it really the town? That was always a key thing with me. And that was something my grandmother explained to me very early on. She's the reason why I love this kind of film and stuff. Is she was like, well, who was the bad guy? And I'm like, Mom, sorry. I was like, Grandma, the monster didn't really do anything wrong. I was like, I went and asked her about that. I said, I don't see it. Yeah, he killed a kid, but he didn't do it intentionally,
right,
on purpose for malicious intent. He didn't. She's tossing these things, and he doesn't understand the concept of what he's done. And then when he realizes it, there's a real big difference in the character aspect. And I'll tell you what, man, for a guy who spent an entire movie not being able to say a word until Bride of Frankenstein, he really nailed it. As far as I'm concerned, that's been the best Frankenstein ever.
Oh, Karloff did not like the idea of Frankenstein speaking. He lobbied against that, but he lost.
Oh, for Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah. He felt like if he could speak, the reason why he was, people liked him was because he was almost childlike in his youth, in his way he didn't understand things, and it felt like if he spoke, then he would have, like, he might as well just act like himself or whatever. And so what they did as sort of a compromise is they got a bunch of kids to write down a bunch of words or whatever like that, and then they picked those words. So it's like, okay, you're just speaking as a child, basically.
In Bride of Frankenstein, he speaks like a child, and in Son of Frankenstein, and I believe Werewolf Meets Frankenstein, he never speaks.
Yeah, so they weren't very consistent with that, but
exactly.
Oh shit! Sorry guys, I got a fucking cramp in my leg. But anyway, yeah, all right, folks, we've hit an hour, and I think we barely scratched the goddamn surface of this stuff. So, folks, I hope you've enjoyed it. Alyssa, Jack, I hope you have had a blast, as much fun or more fun than I've had doing this, because this is what I love. This is my passion, is telling people, educating people, about, history, films, movies. We've gotten into a culture now where it's what? Huh? What? Okay. I mean, that's it. And it's just been so, when I grew up, and then when you try to ask questions about a movie or you try to interpret it, you're a lot of times nowadays attacked for that because you don't have the agreement somebody else has. You can go up to a person or on social media, because social media is what it is. And I'll give you a perfect example. I had I think today or yesterday, I can't remember which, on Twitter, somebody was talking about Doctor Who, and he's like, can we retcon the retcon? And I was like, okay, what was the retcon? And the guy was like, what the fuck do you mean, what's the retcon? The only fucking retcon. And I'm like, I'm not a Whovian. I don't know. And then somebody else, at least, explained. I said, oh, okay, I remember hearing about this. And, I was like, okay, there are people who are very dedicated to a certain genre. I'm dedicated to Star Trek. I'm dedicated to Star Wars and certain other geek media. But we're all, even though we're geeks, we have different passions. We have different ways of viewing movies. Hence where you guys are introducing, a lot of historical context, which is what I love. And because I'm a big history guy, that's the thing. We're supposed to be educating each other, but people nowadays don't want to hear that. And when you have questions, they're like, figure it out. I'm like, okay, what do you want me to do? Go on the fucking Google? Let's take a look at what Google will pop out or what YouTube will pop out. I don't want to hear what other people want to say. I don't want to hear what the experts say. I don't want to hear what the celebrities say. I don't want somebody telling me a movie is good, because trust me, at this point, I think we've gotten to a point where now we're like, okay, you're all full of shit. We know you're full of shit. Let's talk to real people and talk about real stuff and real movies and what made them great. One of the that's the beauty, I think, of what social media has brought for people like us to come together, talk about this, get to meet people who, like you, Jack, who went to film school, you, Alyssa, who have a seems like you have a vast amount of knowledge. I don't know what your education background is, or if you went to college,
but I did, but I just love it for the fun of it. I just love learning for the fun of it. I really do.
Yeah, and yeah, I love this too. This is what I enjoy. This is my passion. This is why I continue these pages. This is why I keep topics like this going. And you know, Jack, and with you, Alyssa, of course, coming on, definitely has, I think, added to the show, definitely added to the conversation, definitely added to everything that we've done these past 3 episodes. And I look forward to doing it again next week. I get excited about it. I was actually pissed that I was 2 minutes late because I was watching a fucking show that just I couldn't turn my eyes away from for a second. And it was a show from 1969. But there was an era we have to, some people I don't think understand, they're too focused on special effects and instant gratification, whereas I think a lot of us who are really film buffs, we understand story development. We want characters built, we want to see a good story. That's all we're asking for. And I want to thank you guys for talking about Universal Monster movies. We will definitely do that's why I said there's a question mark, because I have no idea how many parts this is going to be. We're just going to have to go through it, because we only really talked about in general 2 movies, Frankenstein and Dracula, which absolutely fantastic movies of their time. But like I said, it's the reason why I think we see certain characters as young people. They're like, well, that's what the character looked like. Says who? Says the freaking movie you saw. It's what happened. But before that, with a lot of these movies, we didn't have that. So this was the first time these people could see this visually. And for me, this was my first time experiencing Dracula. This was my first time experiencing Frankenstein when I was a kid. I didn't read the books until about 7, 8 years ago, maybe. But, you know, as a child, I was exposed to this stuff, and it really shaped how I view movies, because I was able to ask my grandmother or my grandfather, and then sometimes my mom. Look, I grew up in a matriarch system, and that's just the way I know how to do things. So it was usually ask mom, ask grandma, and grandma was the one who was really big into this kind of stuff. They did all the movies she had, most of the movies I saw from probably 1984 to 1995 were mostly either she took me to the theater, or I was downstairs in the basement, whether it was West Virginia or Illinois when they moved, watching movies. And all I wouldn't do was grab these classic movies and watch them. And just, you know, as a kid was enthralled by them. Didn't matter they were black and white. Didn't matter you know, those things like that. It was really, I got into the story of it. And as we've been discussing things more and more, not just with YouTube, but with other people, is I started thinking about, you know, especially after I watched Dracula, Frankenstein, and a few others, the score, the music. And I think it was actually Jack who brought that up, about how important music was. And I don't remember when that happened. That was probably like 6, 8 months ago, maybe. But he brought up the point about music, and I was like, shit, I haven't given any thought to music. And then it started to, you know, really change the way I was thinking about that. you brought this up, Alyssa. We should definitely bring up Phantom the Opera because the score for Phantom the Opera, the sound, brings a lot of attention because a lot of these movies, they don't have a lot of dialogue.
No.
So they have to, invoke emotion, and they really understood how to get that tension, get that element. But some of the scariest moments in Dracula, in my opinion, was when it was quiet. There was no sound. That was when it was the scariest, because that was before the whole jump scare scene where it was boom. No. I don't know where people came up with that shit, but it sucks. Please stop doing it. I'm sick of it. You want to scare the shit out of people? Don't use any volume at all and see how bad that freaks people out. Like Jack said, he said one of the scariest things the other time was last time was hearing audio in a movie for the first time. Somebody said that these are what our experiences are about. And, I have to give credit to these wonderful, exceptional people who really put this stuff together and make things that, almost 100 years later, 90 years later, we can still talk about and still extrapolate and still understand them. And that's, I think, the beauty of it, because I'm sorry, I don't see a lot of modern movies nowadays. People are going to talk about, I think in long past I'm in the grave, I think people will still be talking about Citizen Kane before certain movies in the 90s, 2000s. So, with that being said, I know I went off on that a little bit. Let's go ahead and call it a day. Alyssa, Jack, I want to thank you both again for being here. It's been a fucking blast as always. And all right, folks, I'm going to hit the outro. Peace, long life, live long and prosper. And we will catch you all on the flip side next Sunday, where we talk about the history of movies.
I have vampire blood.
Nice.
He'll be back.